can watch The Simpsons, or you can watch South Park, and South Park has like the world's worst animation, right? I mean, everything moves like this, it's all circles and triangles, and you don't care. It's like 5 minutes into the narrative, it doesn't matter that it's circles and triangles having a conversation. It's fine. The icon will work. And that's a good rule for perception, is you use the simplest possible perceptual scheme that you can manage to get yourself from point A to point B, right? It's a map. You don't see the world. You see an iconic representation of the world. And then the question is, what makes the iconic representation sufficient? And I suppose sufficient means a couple of things. One thing it means is tolerable, right? It doesn't cause an excess of suffering and degeneration. It has to be functional, right? And then maybe a more specific example of that would be, well, it has to work, like a map works. A map is a low-resolution representation, but it's a good enough map if you use the map and you start at point A and you happen to be at point A, which is a good beginning for a map, and then you use the map and you get to point B, and you think, good enough map. And that's really, that's us. That's how we think. That's how we construe the world. Our maps are really, the stories that we use in the world are really the maps we use to guide us. And then they have perceptual implications. But that's essentially what you do. So now the question is, all right, what happened in the gorilla video? Well, what happened was you were aiming at something, right? You're aiming at counting the passes. And the question is, well, why were you doing that? And the answer is, well, someone told you to, asked you to. And then you might ask, well, why did you listen to them? There's lots of other things you might have done in the lab, but that isn't what you did. You did what you were asked to. And we might say, well, that's because you're reasonably cooperative and civilized. And then we might say, well, why is that a hallmark of cooperation and civilization? And we might say, well, reciprocity, like spontaneous reciprocity between strangers who have a bit of a contractual arrangement is part of civilized behavior, and so that's the appropriate thing to do. And we might say, well, you wanted to do a good job in the lab because you wanted to make sure that your status wasn't too low. You know, you could count to 16, and so you can give yourself a pat on the back of the head for that. And, you know, it's part of being a civilized person. And so there's a huge value structure behind that. Like, you didn't go into the lab and shoot it up, you know? You didn't bring a hand grenade, right? And you didn't sexually assault the experimenter. There's lots of things you could have done in there. And you didn't do those things. You just sat there and counted the balls and missed the gorilla. Okay, so, and there's complicated reasons for that. There are deep reasons for that. And so there are deep reasons for how you perceive things and why. And so that's what we're going to go into. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the basics of perception. And perception is very, very tightly related to action, to movement forward, and to emotion. And those things are very important to know. They're very tightly associated. So for example, you live in a map, let's say, or a story, and the story is, wherever I am isn't as good as it could be, and so I'm going to go somewhere that's somewhat better. And, you know, that can be of different time frames. Maybe you've got a plan for the next minute. You know, you're hungry, and so you want to go somewhere to eat, or maybe it could be for the next hour, or the next week, or the next day, or the next year, or whatever. But basically what you're trying to do is take where you are, point A, and make it better, point B. And so you're always somewhere that isn't quite as good as it should be, and you're always going somewhere that's somewhat better. At least that's the hope. Unless things have gone wrong, you know, and you feel, God, it's nothing but downhill from here on in. And that's not good. You don't want that. That's a pathological condition. So, and it's kind of unfortunate in some sense, because it means you can't be satisfied with what you've got. But how the hell can you be satisfied with what you've got? Because you've got problems coming your way. You know, I mean, even if everything's okay right now, which it probably isn't, but even if it was, that doesn't mean everything's going to be okay tomorrow or next week or next year or 5 years from now, right? You've got the future to take care of and your future self, and you've got your family to take care of, and maybe you've got your community to take care of, so you've got some problems. And so the way things are isn't good enough, and so you're going to fix them a bit. And so then you fix them across different levels of resolution. And you do this, you do this technically in this manner. So you identify where you are. One thing you might think about is if you're mixed up, one of the problems you might have is that you don't know where you are. Lots of times people have to go to therapy or talk for a long time to someone to find out where they are, because your experience might have scattered you everywhere, and you feel that that you've come apart at the seams, right? That things have fallen apart around you, that you're in chaos. You don't know where you are, and so then you're in trouble, because how the hell are you going to plot a course forward into the future if you don't know where you are? And so maybe you have to bring yourself up to date. I have an exercise online, by the way, at a place called Self-Authoring, which is called the Past Authoring Exercise. Fittingly enough, and what it asks you to do is to write an autobiography. It's a guided autobiography, and it can kind of bring you up to date. And you can know if you need to be brought up to date. It's fairly straightforward. If you're obsessed by memories of the past, more than 18 months old, and most of those are negative, so anxiety-provoking most often, then there's a lot of you that's stuck in the past. And what that means is you didn't map the territory well enough, and the parts of your brain that are alarm systems, anxiety systems, are saying, no, there's holes in the way you're looking at the world. There's holes in the way that you're looking in the world. And you fell in them once, and you don't know where they are, and you don't know how to fill them, and you don't know how to walk around them, and so you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them, you can't forget them. So you have recurring nightmares, for example, are a good example of that sort of thing happening. But in any case, if you have memories like that, you remember them, they make you feel anxious and negative, you're stuck back there. Your body is still reacting as if there's an emergency that could happen again that you haven't fixed. And it doesn't matter if it was your fault. That's irrelevant, because the alarm system doesn't care. Like, when your smoke detector goes off, it isn't relevant whether it was your fault. The smoke detector just says, house is on fire, and that's a bad thing. And your anxiety systems are like that. If they're tagging old memories with anxiety, then you have to do something about it, or you will be tortured by those memories forever, because that's how the alarm system works. And so maybe you need to go back there and clean things up. You've got to figure out, okay, well, how did this happen? What sort of role did I play? Even if it's a minor role, that doesn't matter, because the point is that you don't want to be put in the same vulnerable position again. So anything you can do to strengthen yourself is good. You know, and often if it's a really old memory, like maybe you were a child, you're not a child now, so you probably have a variety of techniques at hand that you could use to deal with a situation like that if it came up now. And so you have to update that part of your brain that still thinks you're 4. And lots of people have parts of them that are still stuck in some traumatic childhood experience. And they don't, I had a friend like that who had a terrible childhood. And I mean, really, I've had clients with terrible childhoods, and his was like top of the lobster hierarchy in terms of terrible childhoods. And whenever he had a dream about it, which was very often, he was 5 in his dream. He's 58. You know, he's not 5, but hadn't been updated, and so he was still 5 in his dreams. It was a complete bloody nightmares for him, complete with all sorts of terrible physiological symptoms, really hurting his life. He couldn't get himself updated. And he's much older in his dreams now, by the way. He's up to about 45, so which is way better than 5, you know, because you can't fight back when you're 5, but you can fight back when you're 45, especially if you have some, you know, some experience at your disposal. So anyways, you need to know where you are. So let's say where you are is, well, you're on this stage, and you're on this side of the stage, and you decide that you're going to go over to that side of the stage, just to show that you can. And you're making the decision, the same decision that, you know, the famous chicken who is going to cross the road. Why does the chicken cross the road? Well, if it's a sensible chicken, it's because it assumes that there's something better on the other side of the road. It's like, or maybe it's random curiosity, but then it just gets picked off by a dingo or a coyote, so that's not so good. The other side of the road is better, so away the chicken goes. So that's what you're doing. You're going somewhere slightly better. And so that's good. Technically, it's good. Because the way that your positive emotion systems work, they run on a neurochemical called dopamine, which, by the way, is the neurochemical system that drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine and alcohol for some people and opiates affect dramatically and make people feel far better than they should, which is part of their danger. It's a very fundamental system. The dopamine system kicks in with a kick of positive emotion if you're going somewhere that's worth going. And so that's worth knowing. It's really worth knowing. It's like, okay, you want a little bit of positivity in your life. Well, how do you get it? Well, you've got to get the system. It's almost like it's the left hemisphere system for most people. Not that that's particularly relevant, but it is a standalone neurochemical system. It's rooted very, very deeply in the brain's exploratory circuitry. So very ancient system. And it's happy when you have somewhere to go. That's the first thing. And then it's also happy when you're going there. And so if I'm on this side of the stage, and I want to go over to that side of the stage, and I see that there's a nice clear pathway, I can just go straight down this line, then I look at that, and I'm actually a little happy. I'm not ecstatic. I mean, who the hell cares if I get to the other side of the stage, right? I mean, it's a small piece of my life, but it's not nothing. It's something, okay? And so I look at the pathway, and I think that's a good pathway, and I feel a little positive. And then if I move here, and then I see that little table right in the way between me and the other side of the stage, then I feel a little negative, because I don't want an obstacle in my pathway. And so that's really how you're looking at the world, by the way. You don't see objects. It's not the right way to think about it. We don't see objects, and then think about them, and then evaluate them, and then decide how to act on them. Or if we do, we do it rarely and slowly and with a lot of thought. What we see instead are pathways with tools that will move us forward, or obstacles, right? And there's no obstacles here, and there's a nice flat road, and so great. Positive emotion. This is a task I can undertake. The sailing is clear. It's a good day. And then I'm here, and it's like, yeah, well, that's a little annoying. I get a little pang of disappointment, let's say, anxiety. Can I make it around that obstacle? I'm fairly confident. I've done this sort of thing before. So I can take the rough route, and I can, you know, walk forward like this, and then I can do this great trick, which is just this, and then, you know, I've circumvented the obstacle. Now, if I didn't know how to do the little bit of circumvention, then that would be a real problem, right? Because I couldn't get from point A to B, and that would screw up my plan. But I do have that particular skill set, so it's a minor disruption to the perceptual set that I'm using to organize the world. It's a minor bit of chaos, because that's what happens when your perceptual set, the structure that you're using to organize the world, the plan through which you're viewing the complexity of
January 2017, we had gone to watch one of my nephews play basketball. Ellie was running up and down the court at halftime.
Complexity of the world reveals an inadequacy. Then that destabilizes your emotions. So that's another thing to know. One thing you need to know is you need to be going somewhere, and there needs to be a pathway in order for you to feel good. The other thing to know is that if that plan is untenable or becomes destabilized, then what happens is you become flooded with negative emotion. Frustration, disappointment, anger, primarily anxiety. But all of those things sort of intermingled. Anger maybe because you have to fight your way through the obstacle. Frustration because maybe you have to make a new plan. Disappointment because you put a bunch of work into the damn plan and it didn't work out. Anxiety because now there's too many choices in front of you. And so people don't like to have their plans disrupted. They don't like to have their plans disrupted. And the reason for that is that their plans are directly associated with their emotional perception of the world. And so, that's a good thing to know too. That's why, you know what it is you've decided that you're going to go to like a Korean restaurant for dinner, and that's fine, and then it turns out that you can't, and maybe you have to go to a Greek restaurant, and it's like, who cares, right? Unless you hate Greek restaurants. Korean restaurant, that's pretty good. Greek restaurant, that's pretty good. You're still going to be annoyed that your plans changed. Well, why? Well, because it's annoying to have your plans changed. It disrupts the structure that you use to stabilize your perceptions of the world, and it throws you momentarily into a state of chaos. Not much. Now, how much chaos? This is interesting. We don't know, like let's say you wake up one morning and you have an ache in your side. It's like, well, you don't have an ache in your side. What does it mean that you have an ache in your side? Well, you don't know. Like, maybe it means you pulled a muscle, and like, who the hell cares? Maybe it means you have cancer, and like, you're going to be dead in 6 months. The whole range of possibility is there, you know, and some people will assume one thing, it's like, that's nothing, and some people will assume the other, and all of them will be right sometime. And so the question is, how do you calibrate something like that? And the answer is, well, we tend to guess at it. We guess at it temperamentally. So one way we guess at it is we have our set points for negative emotion. So it's neuroticism, trait. Some people will be a lot more nervous about a small level anomaly than others. And maybe they'll go to the hospital first, and they won't die. And then, or maybe they'll be freaking out all the time and they'll be a hypochondriac, right? So there's pros and cons about being nervous like that. The other person's very emotionally stable, they don't worry about much, they think, it's nothing, and then, you know, by the time they get to the hospital, it's too late. Hey, that's how the dice roll. That's one way that you guess. It's determined in large part genetically. Not completely, but in large part. Another part is your position in the hierarchy. You know, so the issue is, well, how safe are you in life? And the answer is, who knows? But one of the way you guess is, well, are you good at things? You know, because if you're good at things and a problem comes up, you can probably solve it. And then you might think, well, how do you know if you're good at things? And one answer might be, well, other people think you're good at things. Because you're really kind of comparing yourself to other people when you're thinking about whether or not you're good at things. And so if it turns out that you're in a hierarchy and you're fairly high in the hierarchy, indicating a certain degree of competence, then your nervous system, under the control of the serotonin system, dampens down your negative emotion. It says, look, you know, all things considered, you're probably pretty safe. And that's nice, but it also means you don't like having your position in the dominance hierarchy challenged at all. Because if you get tossed down the hierarchy, let's say you get fired, what wreaks havoc with your serotonergic function, it makes you defeated, like the defeated lobsters that I wrote about. And then all of a sudden you're way more susceptible to negative emotion. And who wants that? And so that's why you don't even like to lose arguments. You know, you lose a little argument, it's like, whoop, down the dominance hierarchy a bit, up, emotions are a bit destabilized. It's no damn way, I'm right. And why? Because I want to keep my neurochemistry in check. And no wonder. Well, the thing is, sometimes it's better to learn than to insist upon being right, because learning works better for the future. But you get the point. Okay, so now I'm going to go from this side of the room to the other side, and that's my little journey. And so, but that isn't exactly how journeys work. They're nested. You know, you've seen bullseyes, classical arrow, you know, archery bullseyes. I think they're red in the middle usually, right? And then there's a variety of colored circles around them. Maybe the whole bullseye is this big, and you're supposed to hit the bullseye, but the closer you get to the center, the better, but at least you could hit part of it. That would be good, you know. And you're supposed to stand back and pull your arrow back and aim. And so, and that's an acting out of something. It's an acting out of the necessity of having an aim and taking your best shot, right? That's what makes it a sport. Now, and if you think about that, most of our sports are like that, right? Soccer's like that, rugby's like that, basketball's like that, hockey's like that. Almost all team sports involve some sort of projectile going to some sort of target. And usually people organize themselves into hierarchies, 2 of them, because there's 2 teams, and then they compete and cooperate to get the projectile in the target. And for some reason, we think that's really cool, right? Well, look, it's worth thinking through deeply. It's like, you'll spend a lot of money on that opportunity to go in Toronto. You can't buy NHL tickets for the Maple Leafs. They're unbelievably expensive, and they've been sold out forever, even though the damn team hasn't won a championship since like 1968. Doesn't matter. People will spend a fortune to go sit in an arena, like a long way away from the action, and there's these guys out there, and they're tough and they're fast, and they're fighting with this little black frozen disc, and they're trying to get it in a net while someone is trying to stop. It's completely bloody absurd, and yet people are thrilled about it. They're thrilled, and they'll pay for it, right? They don't have to be dragged there kicking and screaming. Like, they line up. It's, oh, God, a hockey game. Thank God. And they'll wear the jerseys. It's like, and then, you know, some character who's put in his $10,000 does his beautiful move and puts in a goal in some manner that's, like, technically impossible, and everybody leaps to their feet, and they just have a fit of joy. And you think, what in the world is going on with that? It's like you're happier when that happens than you were when you got married. It's like you don't see people doing that when they're, and it's not everybody, when you get married and everybody stands up and has a little, like a 10-minute fit and hugs strangers and then goes out and drinks a dozen beer and has a riot and tears down stores. It's like, no, but a good goal, that'll do it. I think Guatemala and Ecuador went to war over a soccer game, literally. So, and let's not assume we're so stupid, you know, even though we are, let's not assume it. There's something behind this. It's like, we really like to see people take careful aim and hit the target. And we really like to see them cooperate and compete in an expert manner to do that. And we really like to see them do that in a way that stretches their ability beyond what we would normally be able to see, right? Because it's nice to go to a competent display of athletics, but now and then you see these like soccer goals on YouTube where these crazy characters, you know, they flip around in the air and they're like 8 feet off the ground, completely backwards, and they kick the ball 4 feet to the side of the goalie. It's just impossible. Like, they're 100 yards away and it's perfect. And you think, right on. That's what a human being is like. And you're not really like that because you couldn't do it, but you are human, and conceivably you could do something like that. And so it's a nice display of that potential for us to hit the damn target, right? So then the question is, well, what's the target? And that's the question, because that's the same question as, what's the meaning? And so, okay, so here's my target, let's say. Let's do a personal unpacking of my value system, at least in part. So I'm a writer, and I'm a writer and a researcher and a clinician. and a professor. So those things, maybe roughly in that order. And so that's my claim to my position in the social hierarchy. And the claim is something like, I'm competent at that, it's worthwhile, therefore I'm reasonably entitled by the rules of the game to the privileges and statuses that are associated with that position, right? As long as I'm competent. So there's a match between social demand and my ability, and as long as I'm playing the game properly, then I'm safe. That's what's keeping my emotions regulated. It's not my internal regulation. It's the fact that I can do what I say I can do. And everyone else agrees, and people value that, and that keeps me secure. That's also why I don't want too much social upheaval, because I might end up with the same skill set in a society that doesn't value those skills, and then what? Then I'm done. So I want there to be an isomorphism between my internal hierarchy of perceptual value and the social structure itself. And so this is also partly why radical claims of multiculturalism are wrong, because at the base of things, we need to be playing a unified game so that everybody knows what everybody else is up to. Doesn't mean that diversity of opinion isn't useful, because now and then the collective claim is going to be wrong and need to be updated. And so you need some strange people around, creative people, generally speaking, who will, take things in a direction that's novel to update. But roughly speaking, we want everybody nested in the same game, and then maybe above that playing some different games. And we need that, because it's the only way we can orient ourselves in the world. It's the only way we can keep a match between our expectations and our skills and our desires and what's actually expected of us in the world. There's nothing that's more harmful than for you to play the game straight, right? To do what you're supposed to do, to be a good person, and then to be punished for it instead of rewarded. Very disheartening. You want what you think to be good and right to also be rewarded by the world in that manner. And that means the structures have to be, the social structure and the psychological structure have to match. And part of the reason that we protect our cultures is so that we can protect the match between our psychological structures and our social structures and keep ourselves oriented, moving forward in the world with some positive emotion and not terrified out of our skulls. It's crucially important. It's why we'll fight to protect what we've built. It's the game we understand. And it's not something that can just be arbitrarily shifted or changed. And that's partly because the aim isn't arbitrary. The aim isn't arbitrary. This is the problem with the postmodernists and the moral relativists. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're 100 years out of date. They've got it wrong. Okay, so I'm typing. And when I'm typing, I'm moving my fingers, right? And that's not thinking. That's moving my fingers. And I don't really know how I move my fingers, but I can do it. And I can do it on a keyboard. And so I can type letters one at a time. And so you might say, well, what are you doing if you were watching me? And I say, well, I'm typing letters. That's my aim. So I'm pretty happy when I hit an A and an A appears. And I'm not that happy when I hit an A and an E appears and I have to backspace. A little annoyance there, right? Because I've shifted off the target. A little frustration. I fix it. That's okay. Back on track. But I'm not typing letters, because who wants to read a bunch of letters? No one. You want to read words. So I'm trying to organize the letters into words. So goal 1 is the letters, nested inside goal 2, which is the words. But you don't want just random words. That's not helpful. How about some phrases? That'd be good. How about some sentences? Letters, words, phrases, sentences. Now we're starting to get into units of meaning, right? And those are directions. They're like a map. They have a point. Like a book has a point. Like a story has a point. And the point is to outline the map properly. And then not just sentences, paragraphs. And those are organizations of sentences that make the sentences make sense, and the phrases, and the words, and the letters, all nested together. And not just paragraphs, chapters, right? And then chapters nested in a whole book. And then not just the whole bloody book, because that's not enough. The book itself has to be nested in the shared literary experience of the audience. I have to assume, if I'm writing a book, that there's a certain amount of culture that we share, because otherwise I'd have to explain absolutely everything about absolutely everything, and I can't. And so the book doesn't work unless it's in a culture that's composed of maybe 1,000 books in some sense that are widely known by all of us, even if we haven't read them. I can assume that the reader is a mechanism that can understand what I've written, and that's part of where the meaning is too. And so that's all nested together, all of that, to make it meaningful for me to sit down in the morning and concentrate so foolishly, in some sense, on moving my fingers up and down on a keyboard. Right? What's meaningful about that? Well, nothing. Who cares if I type a letter? A single letter. Yeah, well, how about a word? How about the right word? How about the right phrase? How about the right sentence? Well, every movement outward, more broadly, makes it more meaningful. And if that whole structure is coherent, then all of the small actions become associated with the meaning of all of the large-scale actions, right? I'm not just typing letters. I'm writing a book. Why? Okay, then we get broader. This is the bullseye. This is the structure of the bullseye. The center might be the letter, That's one way of looking at it. That's the highest resolution thing. I've got to get that exactly right. And then it's nested inside all of these other structures. Well, I'm an educator. Okay, so I'm hoping the book